our van had to pull off the side of the road very urgently because a convoy of Land Rovers were going down, and the driver was like, "Oh, Chechnyan leader." Do you remember that at all?
I remember that.
The Final Summit is produced by Bloodstream Media and made possible thanks to our sponsor, Tremo Pharmaceuticals. Visit resethastudy.com to learn more about their work. The Final Summit was also made possible by support from Genentech. Visit genentechhemophilia.com to take a look at how they are supporting the hemophilia community.
Europe's highest peak often surprises people. Now, most people believe it must be a mountain located somewhere in the Alps. But it's actually a dormant volcano in the Caucasus mountain range in Russia. And even though I knew about the mountain, I knew very little about what Russia would be like when I arrived. After a short flight from Moscow to Mineralny Vody, it was the first time being on a plane and seeing no English anywhere. We piled into a van to head towards our hotel near the mountain. One of my favorite parts of visiting new places is gazing out of the window of a vehicle. I love peering down back alleyways or catching that glimpse into a local shop. These momentary sights of people going about their lives without me being a distraction. But driving in Russia, it was a little different. We were flying down the highway with cars passing each other on the center dividing line. Then, out of nowhere, every car pulled over, and a convoy of Land Rovers flew up the middle of the road. I asked the driver, "What was that?" And he casually said, "Chechnyan leader." I suddenly had a recollection of the images of tanks on the TV when I was younger. Reminders of where we were kept coming. At first, a small armed checkpoint off the side of the road with a few soldiers. The next checkpoint had a large military vehicle occupied by several more soldiers. And then finally, a tank. Mount Elbrus is located close to the border of Russia and Georgia, where over 10 years before, Russian-backed forces began shelling villages in the area somewhat close to Mount Elbrus. While the war only lasted a few days, the tension still loomed large. What I witnessed on that trip faded rather quickly from memory. I rarely thought deeper about the tanks sitting on the side of the road or how that impacted the people that lived in the area. But recent events brought these memories back to the surface. At the time of this recording, Russia is performing a similar operation in Ukraine, but on a much broader scale. Their invasion is putting countless civilian and soldier lives in danger, not only from bullets and missiles, but by cutting off access to health systems, medication, and other avenues that many patients rely on. But it's not just Ukraine. Patients in other war-torn countries and refugee camps have had to face these harsh realities for a long time. This is a global and historic issue. Often in the US, we forget the abject fear that war and political turmoil bring. We are sheltered from conflict in many ways. It's time to talk about how war and other crises add to the struggle of providing treatment and care for people with hemophilia around the world. From Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media, this is the Final Summit podcast, supported through advertising by Tremo Pharmaceuticals and Genentech. My name is Chris Bombardier, and I'm a mountaineer with hemophilia. From 2011 to 2018, I successfully climbed the 7 summits, the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents. But in between continents, peaks, and infusions, I learned so much more about myself, my disease, and my place in the world. Today, we're looking at Mount Elbrus and how war and conflict affect medical access.
The Final Summit from Bloodstream Media is brought to you in part by Genentech. Genentech understands the importance of keeping people in the hemophilia community informed about their condition. To aid in this effort, Genentech created a community hub that encourages discussion, educates on living with hemophilia, and provides support where needed. For more opportunities to meet and connect with community members like you, please visit www.hemophiliacommunity.com.
Elbrus was unique for a few reasons. One, it was because it was in a country that was unlike anything I'd traveled to before. Most countries I had been so far, if you spoke English, you could get by. But in Russia, that was much more challenging.
It was my first time in Russia, and so fun when we were tourists there before going down to the climb.
Yeah, trying to navigate around the country, and we'd ask people, hey, can you help us with directions? And they'd say, no, and just walk on.
No. Yeah, he's like, no.
I'm now joined by my dear friend Vibeke Selflund from Norway.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. We've had so great climbs and so good times together.
Yeah. I don't remember if you noticed this or remember this, but when we landed in, I think it was called Mineralny Vody, it was the airport that we flew into to get closer to the mountain. But we were driving down there, and our van had to pull off the side of the road very urgently because a convoy of Land Rovers were going down, and the driver was like, oh, Chechnyan leader. Do you remember that at all?
I remember that. Remember that. It's like, okay, we are closer to the borders here.
That was really big shock for me, seeing the military checkpoints we went by and the tanks on the side of the road. But then you, being the adventurer you are, had probably experienced very similar things to that at some point.
Well, yeah, I have. I've had some deployments with the military. So for me, it was just actually normal activity. I started out in Lebanon in 1994. Then it was a conflict area there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was 1 year in Lebanon, and then I was a medic in an infantry unit. So a lot out in the fields. I went then to Kosovo and was head of an ambulance team. And then I was head of a aid station with 2 ambulances in Iraq during the conflict in 2004.
I think you have so much to offer to just, you've been in many conflict areas and seen people in such challenging situations. What does that do to people, especially when, their healthcare is disrupted and their access to any sort of care is disrupted? What have you seen and what have you experienced in regard to that?
Yeah, so what I see is that very often the smaller health stations, either they get very hard hit, they get closed, the one nurse or the one doctor out in the rural area get killed or have to flee or something like that. So they lose their local medical facility. And that's happening very, very often. And then they try to go to the next one. The next one is maybe also bombed or destroyed. And then the next one again. So maybe they have been walking for 2-3 days. But because many of these areas, especially in Africa where I've been working, they don't have cars. So they have to walk.
Yeah.
So they have been walking maybe for 2 days with a bad injury. Very many also don't dare that risk of traveling. So they just try to use old-fashioned medicine, like what they were told from grandma, like the spiritual old version of it, you know, maybe only praying, maybe, yeah. And also in Iraq, when I was working there, what I saw there is that they are maybe cut off from electricity. And then you can imagine how many instruments in a hospital that needs electricity.
Oh, yeah.
So it's more or less only like an aid station. What was a big hospital, it becomes just like a first aid station.
Yeah.
So the high-tech things they couldn't use anymore because they were set back so many years. So I saw there were, when you have a broken leg and you want to stretch it, they were using bricks from outside just to have like a heavier, to keep the stretch.
A weight.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. A lot of things you're talking about are like injuries or common issues. What happens when people have chronic medical conditions or like the instance of hemophilia? I imagine that in conflict and war situations, the supply chain just doesn't exist or it gets cut off. And what do people in those situations, how do they handle?
The supply chain just get cut off. So they don't have any of the medicines anymore.
I've been in places, I can't say I've been, Haiti was the only one. That was right before the pandemic.
Once again, this is Lori Kelly of Save One Life.
And as soon as we landed, the tension was incredible. There was a lot of political, this is before the president was assassinated, but there were gangs roving the streets.
Yeah.
When we landed, we saw immediately there were barricades. The barricades mean if you get stuck in a barricade, someone's going to attack you, your car, shoot you or something. So there were barricades, there were bonfires in the middle of the street. So you can see where people are not going to leave their homes to go to the clinic. Because what you have to know in developing countries, you don't get your medicine mailed to you, for heaven's sakes. You have to go to a pharmacy or you have to go to the hospital and you have to wait. And you have to sometimes wait hours in the pharmacy to get your medicine. So anything like this, you've got to stay home and protect your kids. So factor actually becomes, forget factor. You don't even care about the factor. You just care about preserving your life.
Exactly.
What I see, sadly enough, is that those who are chronic diseases, they don't get the priority.
Right.
Those who get the priority are those who are bleeding to death, like here and now. They are shot.
Yeah.
They can't breathe. So it's like only the emergency that they are dealing with when it is like in Russia, now in Ukraine now.
Yeah.
When you have a war, the focus is, on the patients who are shot or injured by war injuries. But, we have all the others.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that get ignored or pushed to the side, which is just devastating.
We just go for the most critical now when it is a war.
Since being in Russia, it was so funny that how like the tanks and the things I had seen in Russia like just never comprehended or like never like clicked in my mind until recently with the war in Ukraine and just like how close I was to that area and like how that must have felt with people. But I also think that I'm having that reflection now with a lot more perspective and information too, because since Elbrus, I got my master's degree in global health from Northwestern, which had some great courses just about access to medicine and just global health policy in general. And then working through Save One Life, we've gotten a lot of requests from people in war-torn countries like Yemen or refugees fleeing Afghanistan after the Taliban took over. And we get these emails of these people in just like desperation. And in some of those instances, they had access to medicine before. Maybe it was limited, but they still had something. And then with this conflict, they were just cut off. They went from having a little bit of hope to nothing. And in some of those instances, we were able to figure it out and help get the medicine to them in crazy ways. But in other instances, there wasn't a way. And it just makes you like look at conflict in a different light. And these wars aren't, explosions on TV, but you maybe don't necessarily see the impact to like civilians and people that aren't really associated. They don't want to be in the war. They want to just go about their life, especially like a person with hemophilia. They just want to go to the hospital and get their factor. But it totally is disruptive. And now I think about those people more and those individuals and how it impacts them in such different ways.
It's so strange because the human body, and it's probably one of our survival instincts, is that we are getting used to situations. So a war situation also becomes a normality.
Yeah.
It is how we have to adapt to and survive. And the sad thing then is that they have to live with the chronic diseases with less supplies, with less medicines, with whatever. So they just have to adapt to the situations.
Yeah.
It's not getting better because they will not get any supplies because the supply lines are cut off. And they are getting shelled and bombed.
Yeah.
So they're maybe losing doctors and nurses. So it is so hard to be a doctor and nurse. They are working day and night and day and night and day and night. And with little, I have seen them using syringes again and again and again because they don't have.
Yeah.
So they can't use clean ones.
Exactly.
They have to use the dirty ones. Needles to give infusions. They're using old needles because they don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all they have, right?
So it's really hard to run a hospital and to want to help.
Yeah.
And don't have the equipment, don't have the people. And they are lined up there and they need help.
Yeah.
So it's really hard. Yeah.
Chronic pain can be caused by many things, but if you have severe hemophilia, there's a chance that some of your pain might be the result of what's called hemophilic arthropathy, or HA for short. That's why I'm excited to tell you about the Reset HA study from Tremo Pharmaceuticals. Tremo is founded with the goal of developing and delivering non-opioid pain therapies for people living with pain. Tremo's Reset HA study is a clinical research study for people who experience joint pain due to hemophilia. The study is evaluating an oral non-opioid investigational drug designed to be taken once a day to see if it may potentially help relieve joint pain and improve physical function in people with hemophilic arthropathy, HA. You may be eligible to participate in this clinical research study if you are between the ages of 12 to 75, have been diagnosed with hemophilia A or B, have chronic pain in one or more joints, and do not take opioid medication more than 4 days a week. If you are interested in learning more about taking part in Tremo's Reset HA study, visit resethastudy.com. That's RESETHA study.com to find a location near you. Reset the way you manage your pain. Visit resethastudy.com today.
The summit of Mount Elbrus was notable for several reasons. It marked the third summit of 7, but was the first climb I carried a Save One Life flag to the summit. That flag made me proud. I felt connected to the mission and connected to the global community. I felt like I was on a roll. I was improving as a climber, and I was building confidence in managing my hemophilia in these extreme environments. I was finding new ways to get active in the outdoors and wanted to continue pushing myself. In the month after my summit of Mount Elbrus, I decided to go downhill mountain biking with my crazy Uncle Dave. The overall concept is simple. You take a chairlift to the top of a mountain and then ride down as fast as possible. It's a huge rush, but the consequences of mistakes are harsh. 2 years previous, Dave broke his collarbone in a crash, and my friend Brandon fractured his arm. That didn't really cross my mind until we were on the last run of the day. I was feeling great. I was bombing down a new run, got a beautiful little jump. The feeling of flying through the air was exhilarating. Until the landing, my front tire hit a rock, and my handlebars immediately twisted in my hands. Now I was flying through the air again, except this time I wasn't connected to my bike. And exhilarating isn't the word I'd use to describe it. I tucked and rolled for the landing, hoping everything would turn out okay. The first contact on my shoulder and upper back were fine, but as my legs continued toward the ground, I felt the point of a rock dig into my thigh. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. There was a rush of blood into the muscle like I'd never felt before. After a few minutes, I managed to crawl back onto the trail and onto my bike. At that point, I couldn't put any pressure on my leg, so I slowly navigated the rest of the mountain. I had infused before my ride, but I knew this was bad. I didn't realize how right I was. My thigh nearly doubled in size from all the blood. I ended up on bed rest and in agonizing pain for weeks on end. I went from climbing the tallest mountain in Europe to not even being able to walk to the bathroom. My goal, my dream, was now very much in doubt, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to climb the next mountain.
So when it first happened, he was in so much pain.
Once again, here's my wife, Jess.
He had been given some pain meds, and I remember he took one of the pain meds and hated how it made him feel, just, groggy and out of it and loopy. And he said it actually didn't really help with the pain that much. So he stopped taking them. He didn't take any more of the pain meds. And I think there's also a little bit of that fear of pain meds within the community, and that's a whole nother topic. But he didn't want to, I think he just didn't want to even play with that. So he stopped taking the pain meds, and he just went like cold turkey the whole time. And he was just in excruciating pain. It was soul crushing to watch how much pain he was in.
I needed to be training and preparing, but now I wasn't even able to walk. I collapsed without crutches. I was worried. Trying to push it and keep up with my friends that didn't have hemophilia was proving to be a terrible decision. My first visit to begin rehab at the HTC in Denver was a depressing day. I sat on the edge of the exam table, my legs dangling over the edge, Dr. Laura Fox was assessing our starting point.
It was a pretty major setback when you had some pretty lofty goals ahead of you.
I'm joined by Dr. Laura Singer Fox, who was my physical therapist for many, many years.
I don't see like hugely swollen quads all the time, but when you take a blow like that on a rock, you're going to get a lot of swelling and bleeding pretty quickly. So I think what stands out to me even more was just like how inhibited your muscle was. Like it wouldn't contract. Like even as it was healing, it just like wouldn't contract. And
Yeah.
so yeah, that was worse than the usual bleed for sure.
She asked me to straighten my good leg. No problem. We moved over to the bad leg. She asked me the same question. Nothing. Not even the smallest twitch. Couldn't move it at all. This was going to be impossible. But then again, some thought me climbing the 7 summits was already impossible.
How do you like come up with a plan to help people come back from like injuries like that? Especially since we had like a pretty significant goal that I had to like start training for in a few months.
Well, that question kind of made me laugh a little bit because I don't think I've ever had to make a plan to, rehab a muscle for a goal like that, right? Like most people, it's like they need to get back to going to work or, maybe they are an athlete, but it's like playing basketball. But this was like, you were doing some serious training and the end goal was to climb this mountain that can be very, very dangerous, frankly. So it felt like really, really high stakes in a way that I wasn't used to. Like one of the things I like about PT is it's usually not like life or death situation. And this felt like, whoa, like, I didn't want you to climb if you weren't ready and it wasn't going to be safe, but I didn't want you to be behind on your goals. So it was like, can we get there? And, and how do we do it? So yeah, it was very unique is the answer to that question. Planning for that.
We started small and easy to avoid any rebleeding. She attached electrodes to my leg with the goal of being able to activate the muscles in a week. I followed her instructions to a T, and it worked. I could see a little twitch in my quad.
I guess I've never asked this question before to a PT, but I've made this assumption that people with hemophilia, like PT takes longer and coming back from injuries takes longer because of the, challenges with rebleeding. Is that actually true?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in general, that's true, although it doesn't have to be significantly longer. In the case of a muscle bleed, though, I will say muscle bleeds, in my experience, do tend to take longer than just someone without a bleeding disorder who pulled a hamstring, for example, because you actually have like this, pocket of blood that is bridging that gap, but it's not bridging, it's actually blocking the gap, right? So the tissues are trying to heal and reconnect and reconfigure, but you've got this blood in there that has to be resorbed, and that can take some time. So especially with muscle bleeds, I think it does push out the finish line a bit further.
Yeah, and that was a significant one.
He just had an accident. And if anyone else had crashed, it wouldn't have been this bad, okay? Like you're not going to bleed to that severity, but anyone else who had slammed into a rock the way that he slammed into a rock would have been on crutches and would have had a hematoma and damaged themselves. So if anything, it really highlighted for me the importance that he always factor up before he goes out and does something, because that injury could have been much, much more severe had he not.
Progress was slow, but a few months in, I had hope. And Laura never dissuaded me from Denali. She believed in me.
As we kind of progressed through the rehab, was there a moment when you're like, oh yeah, he's gonna make it back for this climb?
I think my confidence in our ability to get there just, steadily increased over time. There wasn't like one moment where I was like, okay, now I can trust it. Like we're gonna make it. But just kind of over time, working together, seeing the effort you were putting in, seeing the progress that you were making, being able to, progress your activities, your exercises to higher and higher level, and you responding well. And that was all very encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It was still nerve-wracking. Like when I think back on the whole 7 summits experience, that was one of the points that stood out to me as well. Like,
yeah,
where there was a little bit of a holding our breath moment.
yeah, me too.
Thanks for listening to The Final Summit, a podcast from Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media, supported through advertising by Tremo Pharmaceuticals and Genentech. Be sure to rate and subscribe to The Final Summit on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share this episode with a friend. On the next episode, we face an uphill battle and attempt Denali.
It's like the little quiet internal pride, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, I can just push through this and then get there and it'll all be all right. But sometimes it takes a toll on you
Yeah.
before you realize it.
I'm Chris Bombardier. Until next time, find your outside.
To learn more about Chris's work with Save One Life, visit saveonelife.org. The Final Summit was written by Chris Bombardier and Drew Johnson, produced and directed by Keith Cornella, edited by Greg Bernhard, artwork by Christina Newhart, executive produced by Patrick James Lynch. The Final Summit was made possible by advertising support from Tremo Pharmaceuticals. Visit resethastudy.com to learn more about their work. The Final Summit was also made possible by advertising support from Genentech. Visit Genentech Hemophilia to take a look at how Genentech is supporting the hemophilia community.